Hello and welcome. I'm Siddharth Zarabi and you're watching this special business roundtable on the economic priorities of the G20 Summit. With just a day left for the leaders' meeting, top Indian government functionaries have said there is a strong chance of a consensus on as many as 10 key economic issues, including crypto regulation, climate, and multilateral development bank restructuring, among others. This would clearly be good news for India's G20 presidency. In fact, let's take a look at what is expected on the economic front.
For the past 2 years, India has been pushing for global regulations on cryptocurrencies. Even as Bitcoin prices crashed last year after zooming to $64,000, the Finance Minister and the RBI have been highlighting what a threat the unregulated digital currencies could be. According to highly praised sources, the G20 Leaders Summit is expected to take up discussions on the way forward for regulating cryptocurrencies. The synthesis paper prepared by the IMF and the Financial Stability Board has laid down a comprehensive roadmap on building blocks for regulating these assets. This will now be taken up for further discussion at the summit this weekend, and there are indications that a consensus is in sight.
India's presidency has put on table in the G20 issues related to regulating or understanding that there should be a framework for handling issues related to crypto assets. Active discussions are happening. Content-rich papers from institutions like IMF, FSB, OECD are all being discussed on various issues, and on crypto, IMF and FSB have also given their synthesis paper.
There is also likely to be forward movement on reforms and strengthening of multilateral banks, in particular the recommendation on the capital adequacy framework. There is also growing support for overall reform of NDBs to articulate the voice of Global South. There has also been progress on the use of digital public infrastructure for financial inclusion. India is the co-chair of the Financial Inclusion Action Plan along with Italy, and will give policy guidelines for G20 financial inclusion initiatives for a 3-year period from 2024 to 2026. Importantly, discussions will also be held on managing global debt vulnerability, which has been a key agenda of India's G20 presidency. Debt vulnerability of 3 countries, including Zambia, Ghana and Ethiopia, has been addressed under the common framework for debt treatment. Sri Lanka's debt restructuring is being done outside the framework.
Similarly, global debt distress. Countries are in deep distress, not just less developed countries, but middle-income countries as well. That affects the global financial architecture as well. Even discussions on debt distress under Indian presidency are happening in the G20, seeking global collaboration.
However, differences remain in certain areas, especially tying up climate issues to debt restructuring is registering some pushback from China. Similarly, there has not been agreement with Russia on the issue of assessing the macroeconomic consequences of food and energy security. With Karishma Sudani, Bureau Report, Business Today Television.
And to debate this, we are joined by Dr. Janmejaya Sinha, the Chairman, India at the Boston Consulting Group, Manjeet Kriplani, Executive Director, Gateway House, Ramendra Verma, Partner and Leader of Government Sector at Grant Thornton, Bharat, and our very own Saurav Majumdar, the Editor of Business Today. Saurav, I'm going to come to you. There are actually around 27 subjects which are said to be part of the economic agenda, the finance track of the G20. As we know, 2 different tracks, the Sherpa track and the finance track, of which our colleagues have said that around 10 have seen forward movement. I'm going to pick up the crypto subject right at the top, Saurav, and the question to you is, has India's stance, which has been maintained for almost 2 years, and which BT had reported first before anybody else. India wanted a global consensus on crypto regulation, quite in contrast to China, which went ahead and banned the sector completely. Is that now coming correct, and do you see the possibility of a global framework for crypto regulation? Saurav Majumdar.
Thanks, Siddharth. I think that is essentially the case, because India has been saying, and if you see even the RBI governor's multiple statements to that effect, he has of course said that the crypto assets, the crypto trade is a threat to financial stability. It needs to be looked at very, very seriously. In that sense, I think the RBI governor's stance has also been sort of ratified by the discussion paper which has come out today, the IMF and the Financial Stability Board paper. But the more important point which you mentioned is that there cannot be an overall ban. I think that is the very critical point which this paper mentions. And a ban will serve no purpose. In fact, a ban would only lead to excessive financial instability, because it would just make the entire trade go underground. And there is merit, according to the paper, what the paper says and suggests, that there is merit in a broader global regulatory framework to look at the crypto assets. Banning the mining of cryptos is not going to make any sense at this point, because that will just get the trade into a very dark, different territory, and that will become even more difficult to control. So therefore, I think a ban is clearly not on the agenda if this paper is to be taken at the G20 Leaders Summit. And I think the broader consensus is going to be that there is no point, because you can't regulate technology which is upon us. You can't wish away technology which is upon us, Siddharth. Technology will always be ahead. Regulation has to then follow and then create a framework with guardrails. I think that's what we are seeing across the board, not just in crypto. And that's the point which I think is emphasized in this paper as well.
Absolutely, and I'm reminded of what Prime Minister Modi has said in the past overall as far as innovation and adoption of a technology culture is concerned. And Dr. Sinha, I'm coming to you on the broader message that would come through. Of course, I must also tell our viewers that the paper and the inputs and the recommendations are likely to be crystallized around October. There is another meeting that will happen in Marrakesh of the finance ministers and central bank governors, where the crypto roadmap will come. But Dr. Sinha, crypto regulation likely to be one of the biggest achievements of the G20. India will take pride in the fact that it has pushed through a global framework in this regard. How would you respond to that?
So look, first we need to understand what crypto is. Crypto is based on blockchain, and the future of blockchain is going to be quite determining as we go further in the developments around technology. There are many elements around that which will be a core and fundamental area which will lead to a lot of developments, including cross-border trade, etc. So firstly, we need to just distinguish a few of the terms which are around there, central bank, digital currency, crypto. Crypto right now, which is more of an asset rather than a medium of exchange. We just need to recognize that, and has been used in that frame. The other thing is that the world is in some ways fragmented, and it is important that India, during India's presidency, something like this will advance.
Manjeet Kriplani, I'm coming to you not on specific technical aspects of crypto regulation, but the broader point. China went ahead, banned it. India has, in fact, in some ways struggled with how to regulate and come up with a framework. And to repeat, over the last 2 years, we have seen several statements from the government of India and off-record briefings saying, hey, listen, we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. In the context of China's claim to global leadership, South leadership, how would this development be as far as India's contribution to a global agenda is concerned?
Well, first, India has already contributed to the global agenda because we've got digital public goods, which has been our central G20 offering. Now, in all this, with this, we have also passed the DPDP, our data protection bill. This is a leading regulation and likely to be one of the best in the world. And for our digital public agenda, because we have been so careful about what it means, we've got privacy built in, etc., we are also looking at what they call techno-legal regulations to manage all our various digital aspects. And crypto will, I think, fall into these very forward-looking categories of technology that India will now start to look at with one eye rather than look at them differently. So I think that people should follow, the world should follow what we are doing. We're going to have, as Janmajay says, some very forward-looking regulations, and it may not be absolutely in time with the G20 presidency, but we do have a long runway. We've got Brazil after us, which is looking at similar things. We've got South Africa, and the digital laws and regulations are just going to get better and more tightly crafted. So, we can look forward to being really pioneering leadership positions and regulations of various digital currencies or aspects of technology.
Ramendra Verma, what Manjeet is really telling us, and I agree with her, the question I have for you, different countries in the world, let's take AI for example, which is not a subject matter really here, will eventually become. The fact that India is investing so much time and effort, even taking UPI overseas, and is made a carte blanche open offer to offer UPI to any country that wants it, a symbol of India's actual global leadership when it comes to the digital future?
I think, yes, India has been in the digital forefront. In fact, our talent has been, in the world's best organization. And it was pretty sad to see that India as a country struggled in the government IT setup. But I think that's 1 decade away. Now we are at a place where we are showing the world how digital public infrastructure can be used by the government and how it can fast track and be for inclusive growth. So I think that UPI is just one of it. But I'm sure there are, right now as we speak, there are multiple stacks being developed by the government and its agencies, which not only have relevance in India, but I'm sure this has relevance in many of the developing nations, and which are around 120 plus countries across the world. It will have very great relevance.
Okay, there's another major expectation, and this is to do with the reform of what are called multilateral development banks, because that's also linked to those countries that do not have the ability to self-finance their development. Let's now come to another crucial aspect, and this is the reform of the multilateral development banks. Dr. Sinha, I want to start with you and request you to explain this need for the reform of these MDBs. There is, of course, the question of capital adequacy. But what our colleagues have told us, and we have reported that the current framework can possibly lead to additional lending of around $200 billion over the next 10 years. And this would obviously be for those economies that need it more. How significant is the reform of multilateral development banks?
This is a big topic. I have strong views. I have to be very careful. I'll be succinct in just making 3 points right now. The first is that because they have a very high credit rating, oftentimes they have a credit rating, like if you saw the new development bank which came about, it had a credit rating more than their parents. So you can therefore use that credit rating and on that basis leverage your balance sheet to be able to raise funds which are cheaper, and then be able to lend these cheaper funds to the countries that need it. The current need to actually restructure the world, both the UN the World Bank, the IMF, and all these multilateral agencies to recognize a world which is very different from what the post-World War II world was, is a fundamental issue. I mean, it's a fundamental issue. You see its manifestations in all kinds of things. India has just been confirmed at a BAA minus credit rating, though the whole world wants to put money into India. I mean, so there are some of these old models with a new challenge.
Yes,
and this is a
old money and an old mindset, perhaps.
Old models.
Old model, absolutely. Old model, absolutely. Manjeet, do you think MDB reform will be one of the very strong outcomes of the Indian presidency? Although it's clear that even this issue is going to be taken forward in the October meeting during the World Bank Fund Bank meetings.
Yes, I think we are going to have some success. I also understand that. And it's, as Janmajay was saying, it's really overdue because the world is changing so dramatically that the countries that were the providers of capital now have spent all their money in Ukraine. They have no money left to aid any countries. China is in a decline. And so, India is an aid giver, but not in the large numbers that it used to be. So MDB reform is very, very important. And in any case, there are new banks that have come. A New Development Bank is one, AIIB is one, but also, the next two presidencies is going to be Brazil and South Africa. Now, Brazil already has a digital public infrastructure similar to India. They've got a UPI called PIX. They've got a payment system. We are already in the future. The next three countries, these are the IPSA countries, the grouping that came before BRICS.
Yes.
And they already have a funding process. They have a fund. That fund should be increased. All the new institutions that want to come about, now's the time for them to step up. And MBDB reform of the old banks, if they don't accept it, they're going to be completely outdated and nobody will go to them anymore. At the moment, they command resources. But one interesting point, you talked about UPI. In a way, UPI has kind of negated SWIFT, hasn't it?
Yes.
And so it's going to not matter who's sanctioned and who's not sanctioned. So if they don't reform, new institutions are going to come about that will bypass all these punishments and the weaponization that has been done to development banks to, for countries that they don't like, the big funders don't like. So we're entering a very, very interesting world.
That's an excellent perspective. Raminder Verma, you want to take that point forward, and I'm just struck by what Manjeet says in terms of the distributed nature of UPI. We haven't even thought about who will govern a global UPI framework. You want to add any thoughts to that, Raminder Verma?
Yeah. Before that, I just want to add a few, points on the governance reforms of the multilateral bank. I think this is something which has been pending quite for some time, and it is a very complex process. At one side, you have the countries who have the resources, and at the other side, you have countries which want those resources for the development. And often, the people who want development in their countries have very less voting rights. So finally, it becomes the game of the resource-heavy persons or countries, and they decide the agenda. And very often, it gets clubbed with the political agenda. So that's something which is of risk here, and possibly that needs to get addressed, and hopefully in the new setup which is coming, it should be getting addressed.
Right.
And we will have a much better voting rights and representation in the decision making.
Right.
The second thing has to be on the resource mobilization from where the money comes, as is being said. Right now, the resources are getting drained out, and from where will we be getting the resources to fund the developing nations? That's the other element. I think, lastly, I would point out towards the transparency and accountability. So these are some of the things. Now, the answer lies when you are saying who will be owning the UPI. I think it at some point of time, and I'm hoping possibly India will come to that age that they will be owning, or not directly, maybe through multilateral, I won't say banks, but institutions which will start providing those services. Not only, it may not be relevant for the developing nations, but the 50-odd countries in Africa, and I have spent 3 years in Egypt in a role, I can see that the resemblance of the solutions which are applicable in India are very much applicable there. So I think India can take a pole position in providing that digital public infrastructure through a common ownership, because that's what our agenda is. We don't want to sort of control the world, but at least help the countries which are in the developing process, and that's where we are with them.
Absolutely, and that's why they are called digital public goods. One quick point and a 30-second response. Dr. Sinha, I'm coming to you. On the issue of managing global debt, Zambia, Ghana and Ethiopia addressed some more good progress. Given what you said about Ukraine, do you expect any significant moves in this regard? Quick answer, sir.
No.
Okay, that's pretty quick. We're all hoping that the Leaders Summit delivers some of these key economic priorities. Thank you, all of you, for joining us. And with that, it's a wrap on this episode. We'll see you soon. Until then, goodbye.